Now for the third part of your block on culture and creativity. And as it's the third part, I'm going to add another couple of C's to the recipe. Culture, yep. Creativity, COVID, and crisis. What have been the, and here's another one, consequences of COVID for culture and the cultural organizations for which you have been hoping to work? What have been the consequences for the creators? What I'd like you to do, and I'd like you to do this in teams, perhaps of teams of 3 or 4, and you can relate together either in class or using Google Documents, Google Meet, or whatever system you have for sharing information, discussing and creating documents and audio and video materials, etc. So create your teams. Now what do I want you to do? I want you to think, what are we learning? What have we learned? What are we still learning from the impact that this thing called COVID has had on culture? It seems to me that when you have something and you put pressure on it, usually it squeezes out somewhere or other as a result. Now, clearly, culture, like everything else, has been under pressure. Culture involves what? You will have said in your definitions, it obviously cannot be one person. It involves a number of people, members of society, to come together. And the thing about COVID, of course, is that it's been pushing us further apart. It's been pushing us further apart into greater forms of isolation and separation. But as I said, often when you put pressure on something, you're pushing it, it manages to escape between your fingers. It comes out somewhere else. For example, I don't know, I haven't done the research. Perhaps you know the answer, or you would like to know the answer to this question. The question for me is, for example, if you imagine groups of performers that can't perform. If we think about musical groups that have had to cancel their tours, their events, etc. Does that mean, for example, that has given them a unique time where they're not under pressure to perform, where there are no dates in the diary? Maybe that gives them a luxury of time, maybe a luxury, ironically, of freedom. Freedom to think, freedom to try new things, freedom to create, freedom to try things they've never tried before, maybe using technology. How many times have we seen entire orchestras come together online with hundreds of people who are actually in their own homes playing their own instrument, and with the magic of technology we see and hear an orchestra? That's different. We develop skills, a different vision through that. So COVID has been tragic. We've lost no end of people. We have a friend who's a doctor and he's lost 32 of his own patients. He's a generalist in the area where we live. Now that's serious. And I'm not trying to belittle it in saying, has there been for culture maybe a negative side, but also perhaps a positive side to it? Maybe the two don't equalize. But what have the impacts been? The European didn't happen. Lots of intermittents de spectacle have been depending on that for an awful lot of work in the summer. It didn't happen. These people have lives. These people have families and kids. They have mortgages to pay, a prix immobilier. They have normal electricity and charge to pay on their apartments and houses. How has that affected them? What have their strategies been? Okay, well, those things I used to do aren't working. I've perhaps always wanted to try something different. What have I got to lose? Maybe I could try that. Maybe I could apply my skills in another domain. Maybe my skills are transferable. Maybe I can use this as a shock to the system, as a trampoline to move into something else. For example, I saw details of a guy who was a pizza salesman. He made pizzas. He had a big oven. The oven was all in brick. It was huge. And he thought of himself as a pizza creator, a pizza guy. What he realized through COVID was that people, hospitals, etc., had a need to heat things to very precise temperatures to be able to clean them, to be able to sterilize them, etc. So he realized that his skill was not, here's a pizza, I made it. His skill was in controlling temperature and time to produce a particular result. And he completely changed his vision of what he was and what was possible for him, even what business, what industry he was in, because he started looking at his core skills, not the title above his shop, not the title of the course that he did to train. He started looking at what he was, what he enjoyed, what his facilities enabled him to do, what the new needs were. And he transformed his business and perhaps helped people protect their own lives and save others in the process. That is one really positive result of this effect of pushing down pressure and people escaping from that pressure by doing something else, by seeing another way. So my question to you in this third part of this block on culture and creativity is, okay, COVID, consequences, crisis management. There's a lot written about crisis management. This crisis happened very quickly, and it's one that we really haven't seen before in modern times at all. Certainly not in the developed nations, certainly not in the West. It's come as a shock. What have we learned from it? What do we take away? What can we take and transform the way that we work? I mean, I'm looking at a camera here. I'm having to learn how to talk to you through an intermediary, which happens to be a camera and the internet. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying I'm brilliant either. All I am saying is it's something I've done a little of, but I haven't really had to do much of. Now I'm really having to think about it. And I'm also thinking to myself, I'm about 3 or 4 years away from retirement. Maybe I could leave an educational legacy here. Maybe I could transfer some of these things I'm thinking, some of these things that I do in lectures with my students, but none of my colleagues know what I do. Maybe I could put a lot of this together and hand it on to someone who could work with this, who could improve it, who could use some of it. I don't know. But for me, that pressure has come out in different ways. I'm doing different things. I'm in my early 60s and I'm learning new things because of this. So my question for you is, when this crisis called COVID hit, what were the consequences? What were the, if you like, the impacts? An impact is the moment something hits. It's the hole an asteroid leaves when it comes through our atmosphere and it hits the Earth. A meteor or meteorite at the end and a big hole. like the Tunguska event from the early 20th century in Russia. I'm sure you know about. An impact is one thing, but what follows an impact is the implications. What are the things that run from that impact? What are the changes that follow? I'm going to put my neck on the block being where people had their heads cut off in times of old, meaning I'm going to take a risk. And I'm going to say to you that I think this is the turning point for employment and self-employment. If you go back 200 years, possibly even less, 85% of people were self-employed. They got up in the morning if they wanted. They did what they want, when they wanted, how they wanted, the way they wanted, and when they produced something, they did what they wanted. They sold it, or they gave it, or they used it. They had complete choice between conception of the idea, creation, research, development, design, production, and sales. Recently, we've become 85% or more employed. We've given up all of those choices. We've sold out to the company, to the organization. For the security of a salary, yes, that's important. But what's COVID's done? What has it done? Well, it's taken some of that security away. There are people who are now losing their jobs because companies believe they can be smaller by using technologies. Some companies now are shutting down factories, are closing offices because people are working from home. There is a new paradigm, a new way of doing things coming about. How is this possibly going to affect the industry, the business, the organizations that you work in, you hope to work in? Is it going to change employment in the cultural industries? Are more people going to become self-employed and hire themselves for their services to a number of different suppliers of work, because hiring yourself to one is far too expensive, far too risky if they decide to say goodbye? So I want you to crawl under the skin of COVID and culture. What have been the consequences of this thing from which we have been suffering and continue to suffer? What are the lessons to learn? How are cultural organizations responding to this? How you go about this, I don't mind. You can research it, very wide range of research, nationally, regionally, locally, internationally, globally, if you wish. Or you can look at something in depth. Performance in the music industry, recording, events venues and events. The move towards more things going online rather than necessarily being a physical show. Are we prepared to pay for attendance at a virtual show? Is that the way things are going? This is your expertise. It's your chosen subject. I'm standing outside and I'm looking in and I'm asking the questions and I'm hoping for some answers from you. So in your teams of 3 or 4, I would like you to get your heads around this topic and tackle any parts of it that you wish. It's going to take quite a lot of research and quite a lot of thought, but in the end of it, however we go about presenting your findings, hopefully by then we will be back in the présentiel and we can see each other in the classroom. If not, perhaps this is one of the things that we can do live. We could set up a Google Meet or a Zoom, etc., that we could do together. because I would like to know what your findings are, what we've learned, where you think this is heading. Where is the, to quote from my wife's lexicon as an English literature specialist, where is the brave new world for culture and performance? And how has COVID been perhaps responsible for changing our ideas of what is possible and desirable for the future? So it's a big challenge for you, this one, obviously in English. However we're going to do it, I'll talk to you more specifically about that later. But I would hope that we can set up something where you do a physical presentation to me. Even if I can't be in the classroom, you could do it by video, and we can timetable that, and we can do it, and you can all talk to me. I can listen, I can ask questions to you. Okay, more specifically on that later on, but I hope I've given you a flavor for this so you can start thinking about it. Okay? All right, there we go then.